Therefore, if anthropologists, in the course of their searches in the tropics, find pictures of human beings with narrow lips and narrow noses, they can assume with certainty that they are dealing with immigrant races or that the climate in that area underwent some change. The reverse is also true. For this reason, it is unpardonable nonsense to reconstruct men living in the North at the time of the Ice Age with broad, flat noses, or to depict them thus. As man is descended from hominid apes, and no breed of ape in the world possesses a long, narrow, protruding nose, or a thick, swollen upper lip, it would have been more than logical for researchers to ask why this striking arrangement developed in man. For nothing comes into being without a reason. But, as this too argues against natural development, and indeed does so very clearly and informatively, for it is connected with the diseased condition whereby body hair was lost, the champions of natural evolution considered it more prudent to keep quiet about it. The same prudence causes them to continue in their silence. As the covering of hair slowly degenerated, the resistance of the body declined, and man succumbed more frequently still to illness. His intellectual ability was not yet sufficient, however, for him to fashion clothing. Otherwise, he could have made himself clothes from plant materials. But cannibalism had provided him with valuable experience. He knew that brain is good for the brain, liver for the liver, and heart for the heart. And established, besides, that eating flesh warmed him inside. He did not count calories, he felt them. For the naked freezing half-man, there was thus no more logical solution than to cure and warm himself by eating parts of the bodies of animals. It was not absolutely essential to eat his fellow men for this, for they were for him a highly prized prey, to be sure, but also a dangerous one. Often, the hunter himself became the victim of the hunt. Other members of his tribe would come to the help of a human being under attack, which zebras do not do. Thus, essentially vegetarian half-men, half-ape began to hunt animals and become a carnivorous beast of prey. In earliest times, he ate mice, rats, and hares. It was not until further that he transferred to larger animals. With this, however, The paradisal peace between him and the animals was ended forever. All animals fled from him because they learnt that they had nothing good to expect from this naked creature. Not until a long time later, when he had become more intelligent through the continued pursuit of cannibalism, did he also discover how he could dry and soften the skins of bigger animals and use them as clothes. Thus, this new kind of cannibalism started for health reasons. It was not higher intelligence which brought man to it, but a self-engendered state of necessity, namely nakedness. Necessity does not make people more intelligent. It makes them resourceful, but only within the limits of the intelligence they possess. A man's intelligence came into being through cannibalism, and his spirit of invention will never be able to overstep the boundaries of this intelligence, however great the need may be. Thus, the principle whereby brain is good for the brain, liver for the liver, and heart for the heart, was discovered by diseased cannibal apes. Many of medicine's healing methods rest on this discovery right up to the present day. In other words, both the usual susceptibility to disease and the principle whereby disease is treated come from cannibalism. Through the whole history of mankind, animals' organs have been used to cure illness and to strengthen human organs. The medicine of almost all human races, including traditional Chinese medicine, is still extensively based on this principle today. Even a few sensible Western doctors still prescribe animal liver for those whose own liver does not function adequately. And today people still encourage children to eat the heart, liver, and stomach of animals by telling them that their own organs will become stronger and healthier. They recommended eating animals' brains unwittingly and as a joke. It is true. Because it makes you clever. But men still eat the testicles of slaughtered bulls nowadays and know and perceive very precisely in so doing is increased. From the prevailing scientific point of view, all this should be swept aside as superstition or even as a meaningless rite. Even if such a phenomenon is recognized, scientists have little to gain from finding out why eating testicles affects the sex life. They might discover in the process that the brain has an effect on the brain as well. And cannibals and peasants have always asserted, as cannibals and peasants have always asserted. But then, the truth might come to light that man did not become more intelligent by developing naturally, but by eating brain. This would be very distressing, for thick books in the best scientific jargon have been written about how natural development from ape to man was. The vegetarian ape, who was forced on account of his increasing nakedness to become a carnivore, did not take pleasure in his new medicine for long, for he was obliged to discover that eating meat, especially if the meat was still bloody, made him more aggressive. At first, indeed, this did not disturb him, but when other men, his competitors in every respect, became more aggressive in this way too, he had to turn still more eagerly to the drug which made him aggressive, meat, and step up his pursuit of animals. Soon, our forefathers discovered that the more aggressive the animals they ate were, the braver they became. Around this time, in caves and other dwelling places of man, there suddenly appear, beside the remains of lizards, hares, and rats, bones, the remains of bones belonging to wild cats, wolves, foxes, and other animals of prey. Moreover, they form a substantially higher percentage than is in line with the ratio between the numbers of herbivorous and carnivorous animals in nature. Where one finds for one animal of prey at least 500 herbivorous animals. That would mean that considerably more bones belonging to herbivorous animals should have been found in the dwellings of primitive man. But almost half, and often even more, came from animals of prey. This, of course, struck scientists as odd. Since, however, they could not say that it is easier to hunt a tiger than to catch a hare, they kept quiet. Because this phenomenon, too, argued against natural development. Since that time, man has remained carnivorous. He had been able to clothe himself for a long time and no longer needed meat to generate warmth. But aggressiveness was important to him. Courage, for he expected it to bring him success in life. This success was always to be at the expense of others. In all this, he overlooked the fact that he too became a victim of the disharmony engendered by himself. And up to this very day, the situation remains the same. Has this courage brought him the happiness he longs for? No. All through human history, courage has brought nothing but suffering and misery. Courage is a sudden clouding of one's sense of judgment, where the result of the action taken is left to chance. In fact, the courage drug gave rise to more and more and bigger wars. And each victory brought new disaster in its train. What is written here concerning the effects of eating meat is not by way of being a new discovery. It is ancient but forgotten knowledge. Apart from aggressiveness, mental disturbance and delusions are increased by eating meat. People become intolerant, hard-hearted, self-seeking, quarrelsome, and cruel. At the same time, their capacity for considered philosophical thought is reduced, often even destroyed. Hasty and false conclusions and lack of mental vision then mislead whole societies into the pursuit of wrong goals. The man is no longer able to distinguish between what is important and what is unimportant. In the course of several generations, aggressiveness accumulates in his subconscious, and this oversteps the bounds of what is bearable and has to be channeled away in mass psychoses by means of acts of violence and wars. The physical damage which comes from meat eating is only of secondary importance and is far from being so devastating in its effect that to man's brain and his way of thinking, in other words, a vegetarian creature, like man, cannot go over to eating meat with impunity. He becomes a beast of prey and will behave accordingly. If this happens, intelligence will not have a moderating effect on aggressiveness. Quite the contrary. Instead of being waged with teeth, nails and sticks, wars will be waged with increasingly complicated weapons. produced with the aid of high but misdirected intelligence. This elementary philosophical truth concerning the deleterious effects of eating meat was recognized by the great thinkers and prophets of about 40,000 years ago, when, at this time, cannibalism had to be discontinued in Mesopotamia, and later in other parts of Eurasia as well, because of increasingly frequent brain damage. There should really have been no more wars, because up to that time, they had been waged only because of cannibalism. 40,000 years ago, 40 million people at most lived on the whole earth, where in Christ's time there were only 200 million people. There was plenty of living space available, and there was no reason to wage war for materialistic reasons. However, the end of cannibal wars did not bring mankind the peace it had hoped for the vegetarian ape, which had become carnivorous, had so greatly increased his subconscious aggressiveness that he had to wage wars from that time on. Meat consumed raw by the men, not because there was no fire to roast it, but because they very well knew that raw meat is a better courage drug than roasted meat. They even drank fresh blood because they knew that it made them still more aggressive, i.e., braver. Senseless wars raged between the various tribes, and mankind suffered more than at that time of cannibalism. The human brain, already 50,000 years ago, had a volume of about 1,400 cubic centimeters, as it does today, and human intelligence was no less. The thinkers and philosophers were, at the time, the religious leaders of mankind as well. They also gave directions for the preservation of mental and physical well-being. They exerted their influence to end cannibalism. But when they saw that the peace they yearned for was still not attained by this measure, because man, with his meat-eating and blood-drinking, was continuing to increase his aggressiveness and was becoming yet more warlike, they wanted to dissuade him from consuming the courage drug. But how to bring this view home to man? who likes to see himself as a brave and gallant hero. Every father's heart beats more proudly when his child puts up a good show. When fighting with others, many a woman today is still proud of her husband if he hits out hard in a pub brawl and emerges victorious. The task confronting the wise men of that time was therefore no smaller and no less dangerous than it would be for someone today trying to explain that a medal for bravery is really a medal for lunacy. No one has yet been punished for warmongering. But for peace-mongering, millions have been persecuted and executed in their own countries. So the wise men had to set about the problem prudently. They knew that men will not listen to man. So God had to be brought in. But even a god cannot demand too much at a time from his mentally diseased image. God too must be prudent and advance step by step. Thus, they first preached that God forbids man to eat raw meat and partake of fresh blood. Lively descriptions of these proceedings are found in the myths of all peoples, including the Bible. In Genesis, God is said to have given orders through Noah after the flood, which happened 40 to 50,000 years ago, that every man who kills a man shall be punished by death. At the same time, he proclaimed that man should eat the flesh of no animal, with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof. The mention in the same breath of murder of man and the eating of raw bloody meat is no chance, but a clear indication of the interdependence of the two phenomena. The eating of raw meat was largely discontinued at that time for religious reasons. The gods required this later in almost all parts of the world, but it was not accomplished abruptly. In Europe and China, raw meat was still quite consciously eaten 3,000 years ago, to make men keener and fight braver. Among some primitive tribes in the islands of the Pacific Ocean and in Africa, raw meat is on occasion still eaten today for the same reasons. Some warrior tribes in Africa drink fresh blood taken from animals which are still alive right up to the present day. About 700 years ago, the Tartars tapped their horses, and drank their blood because they needed courage to conquer half the world, not because they could not find water. The final goal of the philosophers and prophets was, however, to put an end to the eating of meat. For the roasting and boiling only slightly lessened its deleterious effects. Murder and wars did not cease, even if general aggressiveness and quarrelsome abated. After several thousand years, the gods went a step further. They spoke to man again, from India to the Mediterranean, and later in other parts of the earth as well. Religious leaders, sages, and prophets proclaimed that God had forbidden the eating of various animals. They did not say why. They simply specified the kinds of animals which man was not to eat. If one examines these proscribed species, it becomes clear they are animals of prey, omnivorous animals, scavengers, or members of a species the meat of which is sexually stimulating. Prophets insisted that the blood, even from the permitted animals, should henceforth be completely drained off. Furthermore, they also introduced several meatless days in each week. They even prescribed meatless months. Mythology has handed down many traditions concerning such things. Even the scriptures of the Jews, one can read about it. For one of the great philosophers to give his people precepts concerning diet was Moses. On his list of embargoes, one finds the eating of animals of prey, scavengers, and omnivorous animals, and of snakes, eels, snails, and the lizard species, the flesh of which acts as an aphrodisiac. Similar precepts were promulgated by philosophers and prophets in almost all parts of the world as long as 5,000 years ago. Moses go back only to about 3,000 years ago. Thus, meat eating was curbed for religious reasons throughout the world. Among almost all peoples and races, and the vast majority of mankind kept to God's commandments right up to our own day. To be continued in part 4.